The dust devil that had been chasing Samuel Carter across the Arizona desert for the better part of an hour finally caught up with him just as the first drops of rain began to fall. He pulled his horse's reins tight, squinting through the swirling sand that stung his weathered face like 1,000 tiny needles. Thunder rolled across the vast expanse of red rock and scrub brush, promising a storm that could turn the dry creek beds into raging torrents within minutes. Sam had been riding for 3 days straight, heading back to his ranch after trading cattle in Tucson. The isolation of the desert had always been his companion, never his enemy. But today, something felt different. The storm approaching from the west carried an urgency that made his horse, Belle, dance nervously beneath him. "Easy, girl," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the growing wind. "We need shelter, and fast." Through the haze of dust and approaching rain, Sam spotted the dark outline of a structure about half a mile to the north. It looked like an old barn or storage building, probably abandoned like so many others scattered across this unforgiving landscape. As the first fat raindrops began to fall in earnest, he urged Belle toward the structure. The building was indeed a barn, its wooden walls weathered grey by years of desert sun and occasional storms like this one. The roof appeared intact, which was all Sam needed. He dismounted quickly, leading Belle to what remained of a small corral behind the building. The wind was picking up now, howling through the gaps in the barn's siding with an almost human voice. Sam approached the heavy wooden door, noting that it was secured with a thick rope tied in complex knots. Strange for an abandoned building, he thought. But then again, people out here often stored supplies in remote locations. He was about to untie the rope when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it beneath the storm's growing fury. It was a whimper, human, and it came from inside the barn. Sam's hand instinctively moved to the Colt 45 at his hip, but something about the sound made him pause. It wasn't threatening, it was fearful, desperate even. He worked quickly at the knots, his calloused fingers made clumsy by urgency and the increasing rain that was now soaking through his hat and jacket. The door swung open with a groan of old hinges, and Sam stepped into the darkness. The smell hit him first, stale air, human sweat, and something else he couldn't quite identify. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls, he saw her. She was huddled in the far corner, pressed against the rough wooden planks as if trying to disappear into them. Young, maybe 18 or 19, with long black hair that hung like a curtain around her face. Her clothes were traditional Apache, a doe-skin dress that had once been beautiful, but was now torn and dirty. What shocked Sam most was her condition. She was clearly with child, probably 6 or 7 months along. Their eyes met across the dusty space, and Sam saw something that cut him to the core. Fear, yes, but deeper than that. A profound exhaustion that spoke of suffering beyond anything he could imagine. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him with dark eyes that seemed to expect the worst. "Ma'am," Sam said softly, removing his hat and taking a careful step forward. She flinched at his movement, pressing herself harder against the wall. He stopped immediately, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. I was just looking for shelter from the storm." She said nothing, and Sam realized she might not speak English. He tried again, more slowly, using the few Apache words he'd learned during his years on the frontier. His pronunciation was terrible, but he managed to convey that he wanted to help, that he wasn't a threat. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps, that this white man knew even a few words of her language. But the fear remained, along with something else Sam was beginning to recognize: defiance. Despite her vulnerable position, despite whatever had brought her to this place, there was steel in her spine. The storm outside was reaching its peak now, rain drumming against the roof and wind howling through every gap in the walls. Sam made a decision that would change everything. Instead of leaving her and finding shelter elsewhere, he slowly sat down near the door, far enough away that she wouldn't feel trapped, close enough that his presence might offer some protection from whatever dangers lurked beyond these walls. "My name is Samuel," he said quietly, settling his back against the wall. "Sam, I have a ranch about 20 miles south of here. I'm not going anywhere until this storm passes, but I won't come any closer unless you want me to." For the first time she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse from thirst and exhaustion, but the words were clear. Why? It was perhaps the most loaded single word Sam had ever heard. Why help her? Why stay? Why show kindness to an Apache woman in a world where such kindness was often seen as weakness or betrayal? Sam considered his answer carefully. Outside, lightning illuminated the barn in brief, stark flashes, throwing long shadows across the wooden floor between them. "Because," he said finally, "everyone deserves shelter from the storm." The storm raged through the night, but by dawn it had passed, leaving the desert air clean and surprisingly cool. Sam had dozed fitfully against the barn wall, waking every hour or so to check on the young woman across from him. She hadn't moved from her corner, hadn't slept as far as he could tell, just watched him with those wary, dark eyes. When the first rays of sunlight streamed through the cracks in the walls, Sam could see her more clearly. Her face was gaunt from hunger and dehydration, her lips cracked and dry. The doe-skin dress she wore was beautifully crafted but filthy now, and he could see scratches and bruises on her arms that spoke of rough handling. "Are you hungry?" he asked, reaching slowly for his saddlebags. She tensed immediately, ready to bolt despite her obvious weakness. Sam moved with deliberate care, withdrawing a piece of hardtack and a strip of jerky. He set them on the ground halfway between them and retreated to his position by the door. She stared at the food for a long moment before her need overcame her caution. Moving awkwardly due to her pregnancy, she crawled forward and snatched the food, retreating quickly to her corner. Sam watched her eat with the desperate efficiency of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days, maybe weeks. "There's more," he said when she'd finished, but she shook her head, wrapping her arms around her swollen belly in a protective gesture that made Sam's chest tighten with sympathy. As the morning progressed, Sam began to piece together her situation from careful observation and the few words she was willing to share. The complex knots on the door, the way she flinched at sudden movements, the bruises on her wrists. Someone had imprisoned her here, left her to die in this isolated place where no one would find her. The realization filled him with a cold anger that surprised him with its intensity. Sam Carter was not a violent man by nature, but the thought of someone abandoning a pregnant woman in the middle of nowhere stirred something primitive and protective in him. "Who did this to you?" he asked when she seemed a little stronger, fortified by the food and water from his canteen. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her words were careful, measured, as if she were testing how much truth she could safely reveal. "My people," she said simply, but the pain in those two words spoke volumes. Sam felt his understanding of the situation shift. He'd assumed she'd been captured by white settlers or soldiers, but this was something else entirely. This was punishment, exile from her own tribe. In Apache culture, such extreme measures were reserved for the most serious transgressions. "What did you do?" The question slipped out before he could stop it, and he immediately regretted it when he saw her flinch. She was quiet for so long that Sam thought she wouldn't answer. Outside he could hear Belle whinnying softly, probably wondering when they'd continue their journey home. Home. The word felt different now, heavier somehow. "I said no," she whispered finally. Two words that contained a world of courage and consequence. Sam had heard enough stories of Apache customs to understand what she meant. Arranged marriages were common, often to older men of status within the tribe. For a young woman to refuse such an arrangement would be seen as defying not just her family, but the very structure of their society. "The baby?" he asked gently. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. "Not his," she said firmly, and Sam heard the first hint of real emotion in her voice, not fear or pain, but fierce maternal protection. The pieces were falling into place now. A young Apache woman, pregnant outside of marriage, who had then refused an arranged union that might have provided cover for her condition. In the eyes of her tribe, she had committed multiple sins. The punishment was exile, left to die in the desert as a warning to others who might consider similar defiance. "What's your name?" Sam asked. She hesitated, and he realized that giving him her name felt like a kind of surrender, an admission that she was placing her trust in this stranger. "Ayana," she said finally. "It means eternal blossom." "Ayana," Sam repeated, testing the sound of it. "It's beautiful." For the first time since he'd found her, something that might have been a smile ghosted across her features. It was gone so quickly he might have imagined it, but it gave him hope. "Ayana," he said again, "I can't leave you here. If you'll let me, I'd like to take you to my ranch. You'll be safe there, you and your baby." The fear was back immediately, stark and overwhelming. She shook her head rapidly, pressing herself against the wall again. "No, no, I cannot. They will find me. They will." She trailed off, but Sam could fill in the blanks. If her own people discovered she had survived, if they found her living among whites, the consequences would be even worse than death. "They won't find you," Sam said with quiet conviction. "My ranch is isolated, and I have understanding with the local Apache bands. They know I'm not their enemy, and anyone else who might mean you harm would have to go through me first." Something in his tone must have convinced her of his sincerity, because she stopped shaking her head. But the fear remained, warring with exhaustion and the desperate need for safety that her pregnancy demanded. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "I am nothing to you. Worse than nothing. I am Apache, enemy of your people." Sam considered this question, knowing that his answer might determine whether she trusted him enough to accept his help. The truth was complex, rooted in years of loneliness, and a growing conviction that the hatred between their peoples was a poison that served no one. "Because," he said finally, "I know what it's like to be alone in the world, and because that baby you're carrying doesn't deserve to pay for the sins adults have convinced themselves are necessary." Ayana stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for any sign of deception or hidden motive. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she slowly nodded. "I will come," she said, "but if danger comes because of me, I will leave. I will not bring death to someone who has shown kindness." Sam stood carefully, extending his hand to help her up. She hesitated only briefly before taking it, her small hand disappearing into his calloused palm. As he helped her to her feet, he felt the weight of the responsibility he was taking on, but looking into her eyes, seeing the first fragile spark of hope there, he knew he was making the right choice. The journey to his ranch would take most of the day, but for the first time in years, Sam Carter wouldn't be traveling alone. The ride to Sam's ranch tested every ounce of Ayana's remaining strength. Despite his gentleness in helping her onto Belle behind him, every mile seemed to drain more life from her already exhausted body. She clung to his strong back, trying to ignore the way her swollen belly made the saddle uncomfortable, and the baby's increasingly restless movements. Sam felt her weakening grip and stopped frequently to let her rest and sip water from his canteen. During these stops, he would study her face with growing concern. The bruises were becoming more pronounced as her body relaxed slightly from its state of constant vigilance, and he could see that whatever ordeal she'd endured had pushed her dangerously close to her breaking point. "How much further?" she asked during one stop, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "Not far now," Sam replied, though in truth they still had several miles to go. He made a decision that surprised even him. "Can you hang on a little longer? We'll be there before sunset." She nodded, though he could see the effort it cost her. As they remounted, Sam found himself talking to fill the silence, perhaps sensing that his voice helped distract her from her discomfort. "The ranch isn't much," he said, as Belle picked her way carefully across a dry creek bed. "Just a small house, some outbuildings, enough land for cattle and horses. Been building it up for about 8 years now, since I mustered out of the army." Ayana absorbed this information quietly. An ex-soldier who'd chosen to build rather than destroy. It seemed to fit with the unexpected kindness he'd shown her. "Do you live alone?" she asked, the question carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. "Yes," Sam replied. "Have for a while now. Lost my wife about 3 years ago. Fever took her." He was quiet for a moment before adding, "Haven't had much reason to trust people since then, until today." The admission hung between them, creating an unexpected intimacy. Two people who'd been wounded by life, who'd learned to be wary of trusting, cautiously extending faith to each other. When they finally crested the hill that overlooked Sam's ranch, Ayana felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The house was modest but well-maintained, built of adobe and wood, with a wide porch that offered shade from the desert sun. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. It looked peaceful, isolated, safe. But safety was something Ayana had learned not to believe in too quickly. Sam helped her down from Belle with careful attention to her condition, his hands steady and respectful. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you inside and cleaned up." The interior of the house was sparse but clean, reflecting the practical nature of its owner. Sam led her to the kitchen, pumping water into a basin and setting it on the table along with clean cloths and a bar of soap. "There's a room in the back," he said, pointing down a short hallway. "Used to be. Well, it's yours now if you want it. I'll bring you some clothes that might fit. They were my wife's." Ayana touched the fabric of her torn dress, suddenly aware of how she must look, how she must smell after days of imprisonment. The offer of clean clothes felt like an incredible luxury. "Thank you," she said softly, and Sam heard genuine gratitude in her voice for the first time. While she washed and changed, Sam busied himself in the kitchen, preparing what he hoped would be the first proper meal she'd had in weeks. Beans, cornbread, and jerky weren't fancy, but they were filling and nourishing. As he worked, he found himself thinking about the enormous change this day had brought to his carefully ordered life. When Ayana emerged from the back room, Sam barely recognized her. Clean and wearing his late wife's simple blue dress, which fit reasonably well despite her pregnancy, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but also somehow stronger. Her long black hair was damp and combed smooth, framing a face that would have been beautiful under better circumstances. "Sit," Sam said, indicating a chair at the small table. "You need to eat." She ate slowly at first, as if afraid the food might disappear, then with increasing hunger as her body reminded her of its needs. Sam watched from across the table, pleased to see some color returning to her cheeks. "This is good," she said between bites. "Thank you." "There's nothing special," Sam replied, "but there's plenty of it." As the evening settled around them, an awkward silence developed. The practical matters of food and shelter had been addressed, but now they were faced with the reality of their situation. A white rancher and a pregnant Apache woman, thrown together by chance and circumstance, trying to figure out how to coexist. "I will work," Ayana said suddenly, her chin lifting with determination. "I will not be a burden. I can cook, clean, tend animals. I am strong." Sam studied her face, seeing the pride that had gotten her into trouble with her own people still burning bright, despite everything she'd endured. "You're pregnant," he said gently. "Your job right now is to rest and get healthy." "I cannot simply take without giving," she insisted. "It is not right." Sam understood. In her culture, as in his, accepting charity without reciprocation was a blow to one's dignity. "All right," he conceded. "When you're feeling stronger, if you want to help around the place, I won't argue, but for now you rest." That night, as Ayana lay in the small back room that had once belonged to Sam's wife, she stared at the ceiling and tried to process the dramatic change in her circumstances. For the first time in weeks, she was warm, fed, and safe. But safety felt like a foreign concept, something she'd forgotten how to trust. The baby moved restlessly in her womb, as if sensing her emotional turmoil. She placed her hands on her belly, whispering to her unborn child in Apache, promising protection and love, despite the uncertain future that lay ahead. In his own room, Sam lay awake, listening to the desert wind and thinking about the woman sleeping under his roof. He'd acted on instinct in helping her, but now he had to consider the practical implications. Having an Apache woman on his ranch would complicate his relationships with neighboring ranchers and the territorial authorities. Some would see it as treasonous, others as simply dangerous. But as he remembered the fear and defiance in her eyes, the way she'd protected her unborn child, even in her moment of greatest vulnerability, Sam knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever complications arose, he'd face them. Ayanna and her baby would be safe here, even if it cost him everything he'd built. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of the fragile trust they'd begun to build. But tonight, for the first time in years, Sam Carter didn't feel alone in the world. 3 weeks had passed since Sam brought Ayanna to the ranch, and their daily routine had settled into something resembling normalcy. Despite Sam's protests, she had indeed begun helping around the house, though he was careful to ensure she didn't overexert herself. Her pregnancy was advancing, and the baby's movements were becoming more pronounced and frequent. The morning sun was just cresting the horizon when Ayanna emerged from the house, moving carefully due to her increasing size. Sam was already working in the corral, breaking in a young stallion that had been giving him trouble for weeks. She watched him work, admiring his patient persistence with the animal. "You are good with horses," she called out, resting her arms on the fence rail. Sam looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. Over the past weeks, these small conversations had become precious to him. Ayanna was slowly opening up, sharing fragments of her thoughts and observations. Each word felt like a gift. "Horses are honest," he replied, approaching the fence. "They don't lie about their intentions, and they respond to trust, unlike most people." Ayanna considered this, her dark eyes thoughtful. "My grandfather taught me that horses choose their humans, not the other way around. He said a horse will carry you through fire if it believes in you." "Smart man, your grandfather," Sam said, genuinely interested. It was the first time she'd volunteered information about her family. He was. A shadow crossed her face, and Sam realized she was thinking about everything she'd lost when her tribe cast her out. "He taught me many things. How to read the wind, how to find water in the desert, how to listen to what animals are really saying." Before Sam could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 2 riders were coming up the trail, neighbors from the next ranch over, Jim Bradley and his son Pete. Sam felt a knot form in his stomach. He'd been dreading this moment, knowing word would eventually spread about his unusual houseguest. "Go inside," he said quietly to Ayanna, but she shook her head. "Running will not change what I am," she said with quiet dignity. "If there is to be trouble, better to face it now." Jim Bradley was a decent man, but set in his ways, and his son Pete had inherited his father's prejudices along with his stubborn streak. They dismounted near the house, their eyes immediately fixing on Ayanna with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Morning, Sam," Jim said, though his tone was cooler than usual. "Heard you had some company." "Morning, Jim. Pete." Sam's voice was steady, but Ayanna could see the tension in his shoulders. "What brings you by?" "Well," Jim said, glancing meaningfully at Ayanna, "there's been talk. Some folks are concerned about having an Apache woman so close to their families, given the recent troubles with raiding parties and such." Sam felt anger flare in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Ayanna poses no threat to anyone. She's under my protection." Pete, younger and less diplomatic than his father, stepped forward aggressively. "She's Apache, Sam. You can't trust any of them. They're all savages at heart." "That's enough," Sam said sharply, moving to place himself between Pete and Ayanna. But to his surprise, Ayana stepped around him, meeting Pete's hostile gaze directly. "You speak of things you do not understand," she said, her English clear and precise despite her accent. "I have been cast out by my people for refusing to submit to their will. I am no more a threat to you than the wind that blows through your fields." Pete seemed taken aback by her articulate response, but his hostility remained. "Once Apache, always Apache. Blood will tell." "Yes," Ayana said quietly, "blood will tell. And my blood tells me to protect the innocent, to show kindness to strangers, to value life above conquest. What does your blood tell you?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jim Bradley looked uncomfortable, clearly recognizing the wisdom in her words, even as his prejudices warred with his conscience. "She's pregnant, Jim," Sam said quietly. "Whatever threat you think she poses, consider that she's carrying a child who's done nothing wrong." This seemed to affect the older man more than any other argument might have. Jim had grandchildren of his own, and the idea of threatening a pregnant woman didn't sit well with his sense of decency. "Look, Sam," he said finally, "I'm not saying you're wrong to help her, but people are nervous. Maybe it would be better if she moved on once the baby comes." "She stays as long as she wants to stay," Sam replied firmly. "This is my land, and I'll decide who's welcome on it." The confrontation might have escalated, but Ayana spoke again, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone present. "I understand your fears," she said to both men, "but fear of the unknown serves no one. I have lost everything, my family, my home, my place in the world. But I have found something here I did not expect." She paused, glancing at Sam with something that might have been affection, kindness, acceptance, a chance to build something new. "And if more Apaches come looking for you," Pete demanded, "then they will find a woman who chose her own path," Ayana replied, "and a man brave enough to stand beside her." The words carried a weight that even Pete seemed to feel. Jim Bradley studied both Sam and Ayana for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his own convictions. "All right," he said finally. "I'll spread the word that you're vouching for her, Sam. But if there's any trouble, there won't be," Sam said with quiet confidence. "You have my word." After the Bradleys left, Sam and Ayana stood in the yard, the tension of the confrontation slowly ebbing. The baby chose that moment to kick particularly vigorously, causing Ayana to gasp and place both hands on her belly. "Strong child," Sam observed with a slight smile. "Like its mother," Ayana replied, and for the first time since he'd known her, she smiled back, a real smile that transformed her entire face. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, they talked more openly than they ever had before. Ayana spoke of her childhood, of the grandmother who had taught her to weave and the father who had trained her to ride. Sam shared memories of his late wife, of the dreams they'd had for their ranch and the children they'd never been able to have. "Do you think your child will be accepted?" Sam asked as the first stars began to appear. Half Apache, raised by a white rancher. Ayana was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on her belly. "I think," she said finally, "that this child will be what we teach it to be. If we teach it to see people as individuals rather than enemies, to value courage over conformity, to choose love over fear, then it will be better than both our peoples." Sam felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced since his wife's death. Looking at this remarkable woman who had somehow brought light back into his carefully guarded world, he realized that what had begun as simple compassion was becoming something much deeper. "Ayana," he said softly, "I want you to know that whatever happens, you and your child will always have a place here, not just as my guest, but as family." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "Family," she repeated, testing the word. "I had given up hoping for such a thing." "Hope," Sam said, reaching over to gently cover her hand with his, "seems to be something we're both learning again." As the desert night settled around them, Sam, Carter, and Ayanna sat in comfortable silence. Two wounded souls who had found healing in the most unexpected place. The future remained uncertain. There would be more challenges, more prejudice to overcome, and the constant threat of discovery. But they would face it together, bound by a trust that had grown from shared vulnerability into something stronger than either had dared to imagine. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the vastness of the desert, their voices carrying ancient songs of survival and adaptation. It seemed fitting somehow for a night when two very different worlds had begun to merge into something entirely new.